Marcus Thompson had always been different from other wealthy ranchers in Cedar Valley. While his peers flaunted their money at country clubs and charity galas, Marcus preferred the solitude of his thousand-acre ranch, riding the perimeter on his favorite horse, Thunder. The 42-year-old had inherited his fortune from his late father's oil business, but his heart belonged to the land and the animals that roamed it. On this particular October morning, the crisp autumn air carried an unusual stillness that made Thunder's ears twitch nervously. Marcus had been checking the fence line near the old Henderson property, abandoned for nearly a decade after the family moved to Dallas. The property bordered his ranch, and he'd been considering purchasing it to expand his grazing land. As Thunder picked his way through the overgrown trail, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Chained to an ancient oak tree barely visible through the thick brush was a young woman. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair matted, and metal shackles bound her wrists to the massive trunk. She appeared to be unconscious, her head hanging forward in exhaustion. Marcus immediately dismounted, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves as he approached cautiously. The girl looked to be around 18, with olive skin and delicate features that were now gaunt from obvious malnourishment. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and Marcus could see old bruises fatting on her arms alongside fresh ones that told a story of recent violence. "Hey there," Marcus spoke softly, not wanting to startle her. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown irises filled with terror. She tried to scramble backward, but the chains held her firmly in place. Marcus raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, noting how she flinched at even his gentle movements. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Marcus. I'm going to help you get out of here." The girl's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Her throat appeared raw and damaged, possibly from screaming or lack of water. Marcus quickly assessed the situation, knotting the heavy-duty chains that would require bolt cutters to remove. The padlocks looked industrial grade, not something that could be picked easily. "I need to get some tools to cut these chains," Marcus explained, pulling out his cell phone. The signal was weak this far from town, but he managed to get through to his ranch foreman, Jake Rodriguez. "Jake, I need you to bring bolt cutters and the emergency medical kit out to the old Henderson place immediately," Marcus said, his voice urgent but controlled. "And bring some water and blankets. Don't ask questions right now, just trust me." As he waited for Jake's arrival, Marcus sat at a respectful distance from the girl, speaking in soothing tones about anything that came to mind. He talked about his horses, the weather, and his ranch, trying to keep her calm while fighting his own rage at whoever had done this to her. Marcus Thompson had always been different from other wealthy ranchers in Cedar Valley. While his peers flaunted their money at country clubs and charity galas, Marcus preferred the solitude of his thousand-acre ranch, riding the perimeter on his favorite horse, Thunder. The 42-year-old had inherited his fortune from his late father's oil business, but his heart belonged to the land and the animals that roamed it. On this particular October morning, the crisp autumn air carried an unusual stillness that made Thunder's ears twitch nervously. Marcus had been checking the fence line near the old Henderson property, abandoned for nearly a decade after the family moved to Dallas. The property bordered his ranch, and he'd been considering purchasing it to expand his grazing land. As Thunder picked his way through the overgrown trail, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Chained to an ancient oak tree barely visible through the thick brush was a young woman. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair matted, and metal shackles bound her wrists to the massive trunk. She appeared to be unconscious, her head hanging forward in exhaustion. Marcus immediately dismounted, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves as he approached cautiously. The girl looked to be around 18, with olive skin and delicate features that were now gaunt from obvious malnourishment. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and Marcus could see old bruises fatting on her arms alongside fresh ones that told a story of recent violence. "Hey there," Marcus spoke softly, not wanting to startle her. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown irises filled with terror. She tried to scramble backward, but the chains held her firmly in place. Marcus raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, noting how she flinched at even his gentle movements. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Marcus. I'm going to help you get out of here." The girl's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Her throat appeared raw and damaged, possibly from screaming or lack of water. Marcus quickly assessed the situation, knotting the heavy-duty chains that would require bolt cutters to remove. The padlocks looked industrial grade, not something that could be picked easily. "I need to get some tools to cut these chains," Marcus explained, pulling out his cell phone. The signal was weak this far from town, but he managed to get through to his ranch foreman, Jake Rodriguez. "Jake, I need you to bring bolt cutters and the emergency medical kit out to the old Henderson place immediately," Marcus said, his voice urgent but controlled. "And bring some water and blankets. Don't ask questions right now, just trust me." As he waited for Jake's arrival, Marcus sat at a respectful distance from the girl, speaking in soothing tones about anything that came to mind. He talked about his horses, the weather, and his ranch, trying to keep her calm while fighting his own rage at whoever had done this to her. 20 minutes felt like hours before Jake arrived with the ATV, the bolt cutters clanging in the back along with the medical supplies. Jake Rodriguez had worked for the Thompson family for 15 years and had never seen his boss look so shaken. When he saw the girl chained to the tree, his weathered face went pale. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. Who would do something like this? "Save the questions for later," Marcus said grimly, taking the bolt cutters. "Just help me get her free." The chains were thick and required significant effort to cut through. With each snap of the metal, the girl flinched, her eyes darting between Marcus and Jake, as if expecting them to turn on her at any moment. When the final chain fell away, she collapsed forward, her legs unable to support her weight after what appeared to be days or weeks of confinement. Marcus caught her gently, feeling how light she was, how her ribs protruded through her thin shirt. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished, her lips cracked and bleeding. Jake quickly opened a bottle of water, and Marcus helped her take small sips, knowing too much too fast could make her sick. "We need to get her to the hospital," Marcus said, but the girl suddenly gripped his arm with surprising strength, shaking her head frantically. Her eyes were wide with panic, and she kept looking toward the road as if expecting someone to come for her. "No," she finally managed to croak, her voice barely audible. "Please, they'll find me." Marcus exchanged a look with Jake, both men understanding that this wasn't just a case of someone being lost or accidentally restrained. This was something much darker, something that involved people who were still out there, still a threat. "Okay," Marcus said softly, making a decision that would change everything. "We'll take you somewhere safe first, but you need medical attention." He carefully lifted her into his arms, noting how she tensed but didn't fight him. Jake gathered the chains and locks as evidence, his jaw set in a hard line. Both men knew they were about to become involved in something that would test everything they believed about justice and doing what was right. As they loaded her into the ATV, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that finding this girl wasn't just coincidence. In a town like Cedar Valley, where everyone knew everyone else's business, someone this young didn't just disappear without people noticing. Someone was looking for her, and that someone was dangerous enough to chain a teenager to a tree in the middle of nowhere. The girl's eyes remained fixed on Marcus as they drove toward his ranch, and for the first time since he'd found her, he saw something other than fear in her gaze. It was hope, fragile and tentative, but real. Marcus silently vowed that whoever had done this to her would pay, no matter how long it took or what it cost him. Dr. Patricia Wells had been Marcus's family physician for over 20 years, and she'd seen him through everything from broken bones to his father's final illness. When he called her personal line that afternoon, asking her to come to the ranch immediately and bring her medical bag, she didn't hesitate. The urgency in his voice told her this wasn't about a sick horse or a ranch hand's injury. Patricia arrived at the Thompson Ranch within an hour, her silver hair pulled back in its usual neat bun, her kind eyes sharp with concern. Marcus met her at the front door of his sprawling ranch house, his normally calm demeanor clearly shaken. "She's in the guest room," Marcus said without preamble. "I found her chained to a tree on the old Henderson property. She's been there for days, maybe weeks." Patricia's medical training kicked in immediately, pushing aside her shock at the revelation. She followed Marcus through the house, noting how he stopped outside the guest room door and knocked gently before entering. "This is Dr. Wells," Marcus said softly to the girl, who was now clean and wearing one of his housekeeper's spare dresses. "She's here to help." The girl, whose name they still didn't know, looked at Patricia with the same wariness she'd shown everyone else. But there was something about the older woman's gentle manner that seemed to ease her fear slightly. Patricia approached slowly, her hands visible, speaking in the same soothing tone she used with frightened children. "I'm just going to check you over, make sure you're okay," Patricia said, setting her medical bag on the nightstand. "Is that all right?" The girl nodded slightly, and Patricia began a careful examination. What she found made her stomach clench with anger. The girl was severely dehydrated and malnourished. Her wrists bore deep marks from the chains, and there were signs of prolonged physical mistreatment. But what concerned Patricia most were the psychological signs of trauma she recognized from her years treating domestic violence victims. "Has she said anything about who did this to her?" Patricia asked Marcus quietly while the girl rested. "Just that they would find her if we took her to the hospital," Marcus replied. "She's terrified, Patricia. I've never seen fear like that." Patricia nodded grimly. "She needs professional help, Marcus. This level of trauma. It's not something that heals quickly or easily, and legally we should report this to the authorities." "I know," Marcus said, running his hand through his graying hair. "But she begged me not to involve the police. What if they're involved? What if that's why she's so scared?" It was a possibility that chilled both of them. Cedar Valley was a small town where the sheriff's department consisted of only a handful of officers, and corruption wasn't unheard of in rural areas where money and influence could buy silence. "For now, let's focus on getting her healthy," Patricia decided. "I'll come by daily to check on her, and we'll need to find a way to get her to talk. She needs to feel safe before she'll trust anyone with the truth." As the days passed, Marcus found himself becoming increasingly protective of the girl they'd started calling Maria, after she'd whispered that her real name was too dangerous to use. She rarely left the guest room, spending most of her time staring out the window at the horses grazing in the nearby pasture. Jake and his wife, Carmen, had taken on the role of her unofficial guardians, with Carmen bringing homemade meals and sitting with her for hours, speaking in rapid Spanish that seemed to comfort Maria more than English did. Gradually, small details of her story began to emerge. She was 18, as Marcus had guessed, and had been in the United States for less than a year. She'd come from a small village in Mexico, brought by people who promised her family she'd have opportunities for education and work. Instead, she'd been sold into what amounted to modern slavery, forced to work in deplorable conditions for people who treated her as property rather than a human being. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard about human trafficking in abstract terms, but seeing its reality in the haunted eyes of a teenager in his own home made it personal in a way that demanded action. "How many others are there?" he asked Carmen one evening as they discussed Maria's progress. Carmen's face darkened. "If she's telling the truth, there are dozens, maybe hundreds across Texas and the Southwest. It's bigger than we imagined, Marcus." That night, Marcus sat in his study, staring at the framed photo of his late father on the desk. Thomas Thompson had been a man who believed in using his wealth and influence to help others, establishing scholarships and funding community programs throughout his lifetime. Marcus had tried to follow that example, but he'd never faced anything like this. He thought about the comfortable life he'd built, the isolation he'd chosen, and the way he'd avoided the messier aspects of the world beyond his ranch. Finding Maria had shattered that comfortable bubble, forcing him to confront the reality that evil existed in his own backyard. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. Marcus picked up his phone and made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years, his college roommate, David Chen, who'd become a federal prosecutor specializing in organized crime. If Maria's story was true, and if there were others like her, then this was bigger than anything the local authorities could handle. "David, it's Marcus Thompson," he said when his old friend answered. "I need your help with something that's going to sound unbelievable, but I need you to trust me." As Marcus began to explain what had happened, he realized that finding Maria hadn't just changed her life, it had changed his. The quiet rancher who'd preferred solitude was about to wage war against some very dangerous people, and he was going to need all the help he could get. David Chen arrived in Cedar Valley 3 days later, bringing with him a team of federal agents who specialized in human trafficking cases. Marcus had prepared Maria as best he could, but seeing the fear return to her eyes when strangers entered the house reminded him how fragile her recovery still was. Agent Lisa Martinez, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, took the lead in interviewing Maria. She spoke fluent Spanish and had years of experience working with trafficking victims. Even so, it took hours of patient questioning before Maria began to open up about her ordeal. The story that emerged was worse than anything Marcus had imagined. Maria had been one of dozens of young women brought across the border by an organization that promised legitimate work opportunities. Instead, they'd been sold to various buyers throughout Texas, forced to work in everything from agricultural operations to domestic servitude. They kept us in a warehouse outside of town, Maria explained, her voice barely above a whisper. There were guards, and they told us that if we tried to escape, they'd hurt our families back home. They had photos of our houses, our parents, our siblings. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists as she described the conditions: overcrowded sleeping quarters, minimal food, and constant threats of violence. The women were moved frequently to avoid detection, and many of them had been forced into situations that Marcus couldn't bear to hear described. "How did you end up chained to that tree?" Agent Martinez asked gently. Maria's voice broke as she explained. "I tried to run when they were moving us from one place to another. I almost made it to the road before they caught me. The man in charge, he said I needed to be made an example of for the others. He chained me to the tree and said he'd come back for me when I'd learned my lesson." "How long were you there?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "5 days," Maria whispered. "Maybe 6. I lost track after the third day." The room fell silent as everyone processed what she'd revealed. 5 days chained to a tree, exposed to the elements, with no food or water. If Marcus hadn't decided to ride that particular trail that morning, Maria would have died there. Agent Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious. "Maria, I need you to think carefully about this next question. Do you remember anything specific about the location where you were held? Any details that might help us find the others?" Maria closed her eyes, clearly struggling with the memories. "It was an old factory, I think. There were machines that didn't work anymore, and the roof leaked when it rained. It was about an hour from where you found me, but I don't know in which direction." "What about the people who were holding you?" David asked. "Can you describe them?" The leader was an older man, maybe 50. He had a scar on his left cheek and spoke English with an accent I couldn't place. His name was Victor. The others called him Boss or Mr. V. He wore expensive clothes and drove a black car with dark windows. Marcus exchanged a look with David. The description was specific enough to be useful, but vague enough to apply to dozens of men in the area. Finding this Victor would require more than just Maria's testimony. "There's something else," Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "I overheard them talking about a big shipment coming in soon. They said it was going to be the biggest group yet, and they were going to need more places to keep everyone." Agent Martinez's expression grew grim. "When did you hear this?" "The day before they chained me to the tree. They were planning something for the weekend, something that would bring in a lot of money." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. It was Wednesday now, which meant whatever they were planning was happening in just a few days. There wasn't time for a lengthy investigation. They needed to act quickly before more innocent people were brought into this nightmare. "We need to find that warehouse," Agent Martinez said, already pulling out her phone. "And we need to do it before this weekend." As the federal agents began coordinating their investigation, Marcus realized that his role in this story was far from over. Maria trusted him in a way she didn't trust anyone else, and that trust might be the key to saving the other victims. But it also meant putting himself in danger, something he'd never had to consider before. Looking at Maria, who was finally beginning to show signs of hope for the first time since he'd found her, Marcus knew he didn't have a choice. He'd stumbled into this situation by accident, but now he was committed to seeing it through, no matter what the cost. That evening, as the federal agents set up a command center in Marcus's barn, Agent Martinez approached him with a request that would change everything. "We need your help," she said without preamble. "Maria trusts you, and we think that trust might be our best asset in finding the others. But what I'm about to ask you to do is dangerous, and I can't guarantee your safety." Marcus looked out at the pasture where his horses grazed peacefully, thinking about the simple life he'd built for himself. Then he thought about Maria, chained to a tree for 5 days, and the dozens of other young women who were still trapped in that nightmare. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Agent Martinez smiled grimly. "We need you to help us find Victor and his operation, and we need you to do it before this weekend when those new victims arrive." The plan that Agent Martinez outlined was both simple and terrifying. Using Marcus's wealth and local connections, they would create a cover story that would allow him to infiltrate the trafficking network. He would pose as a potential buyer, someone looking to purchase workers for his expanding ranch operation. "It's incredibly dangerous," David warned his old friend as they discussed the plan privately. "These people have already shown they're willing to kill. If they suspect you're working with law enforcement—" "Then I'll be careful," Marcus replied, though his voice betrayed the nervousness he felt. "But I can't just sit here knowing there are other people going through what Maria went through." The first step was establishing Marcus's cover story. Agent Martinez had her team create a false identity for him as a rancher who was involved in less-than-legal business practices. They spread rumors through carefully chosen channels that Marcus Thompson was looking for cheap labor and wasn't too concerned about the workers' legal status. Within 24 hours, Marcus received a call on his ranch's main line. The voice was rough, with a slight accent that could have been Eastern European. "I hear you're looking for workers," the man said without introduction. "Reliable people who won't cause trouble." Depends on the price and the quality, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady while Agent Martinez monitored the call from a listening device. I've got a big operation here, and I need people who understand the value of keeping their mouths shut. I think we can do business, the man said, but this isn't something we discuss over the phone. There's a diner on Highway 89 about 20 miles south of your place, Mel's Roadhouse. Be there tomorrow at noon and come alone. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the phone with a mixture of fear and determination. Agent Martinez looked pleased but concerned. That was almost too easy, she said. Either they're desperate for new clients or this is a trap. Only one way to find out, Marcus replied, though his stomach was churning at the thought of what he was about to do. The next morning, Marcus spent extra time with his horses, finding comfort in their familiar presence. Thunder seemed to sense his anxiety, nuzzling against his shoulder as if offering support. Jake Rodriguez watched from the barn door, his expression worried. "You don't have to do this, boss," Jake said quietly. "These federal agents, they're trained for this kind of thing. You're not." "Maria trusted me when she had no reason to trust anyone," Marcus replied, running his hand along Thunder's neck. "I can't let her down now." As noon approached, Marcus drove toward Mel's Roadhouse, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The diner was a run-down establishment that catered to truckers and travelers passing through the area. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early and chose a booth in the back corner where he could see the entire restaurant. Agent Martinez and her team were positioned outside, but Marcus knew that if things went wrong, they might not be able to help him in time. At exactly noon, a man entered the diner and scanned the room until his eyes settled on Marcus. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and the scar on his left cheek that Maria had described. "Victor." "Mr. Thompson," the man said, sliding into the booth across from Marcus. "I'm glad you could make it." "I'm a man who believes in punctuality," Marcus replied, studying Victor's face and trying to memorize every detail. "I assume you're someone who can deliver on your promises." Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I've been in this business for a long time, Mr. Thompson. I understand what successful men like yourself need, and I know how to provide it discreetly." As they talked, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Victor spoke about human beings as if they were livestock, discussing their various attributes and capabilities with the same detachment someone might use when talking about farm equipment. "I have a shipment arriving this weekend," Victor said, lowering his voice. "Fresh stock from south of the border. Young, healthy, and properly motivated to work hard. The price is reasonable considering the quality." Marcus forced himself to nod and ask about pricing, even as his stomach turned at the clinical way Victor described the trafficking victims. Every word confirmed what Maria had told them and made Marcus more determined to see this through. "I'd like to see the merchandise before I commit to a purchase," Marcus said, using the same dehumanizing language that Victor employed. "Of course," Victor replied, "but that requires a certain level of trust and a deposit to show you're serious." The meeting ended with Marcus agreeing to provide a $50,000 deposit and arrangements for him to inspect the merchandise at the warehouse location. As Victor left the diner, Marcus remained seated, his hands shaking slightly as he processed what had just happened. He just agreed to participate in human trafficking, even if it was just as part of an undercover operation. The weight of that decision and the danger it represented was almost overwhelming. But then he thought about Maria and about the other victims who were depending on him to see this through. He pulled out his phone and called Agent Martinez. "It's done," he said quietly. "We're in." Agent Martinez's voice was filled with both admiration and concern. "You did good, Marcus. Now comes the hard part." As Marcus drove back to his ranch, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. The quiet rancher who'd preferred solitude was now an active participant in a federal investigation, and there was no going back. The warehouse was located in an industrial area about an hour from Marcus's ranch, exactly as Maria had described. It was a sprawling complex of abandoned buildings that had once housed a textile manufacturing operation. Now it served as a prison for dozens of innocent people. Marcus arrived at the designated time with the $50,000 in cash, his heart pounding as he walked through the chain-link fence that surrounded the property. Agent Martinez and her team were positioned at strategic points around the complex, ready to move in if things went wrong. Victor met him at the entrance, flanked by two men who were clearly armed. Marcus noted their faces, knowing that this information would be crucial for the federal agents who were documenting everything from hidden cameras. "Welcome to my operation," Victor said with obvious pride. "I think you'll be impressed with what we've built here." As they walked through the facility, Marcus was horrified by what he saw. The warehouse had been divided into several sections, each containing groups of people who were being held against their will. Men, women, and teenagers were crowded into makeshift dormitories with minimal sanitation and no privacy. "This section houses our domestic workers," Victor explained, gesturing toward a group of young women who looked up at them with fear and hopelessness. "They're trained in cleaning, cooking, and childcare, very popular with wealthy families who don't want to deal with immigration paperwork." Marcus forced himself to nod and ask appropriate questions, even as his rage built with each passing minute. These were human beings, not products to be bought and sold. Each person he saw had a family, dreams and hopes that had been crushed by Victor's operation. "And this is our newest arrival," Victor said, stopping in front of a section where a group of young men were being held. "They're perfect for agricultural work, strong, healthy, and properly motivated." One of the young men looked up at Marcus with eyes that held both desperation and defiance. He couldn't have been more than 19, and Marcus could see the family resemblance to Maria in his features. He wondered if this was someone she knew, someone from her village who had been brought here by the same lies and false promises. "How many people do you have here?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "About 60 right now," Victor replied. "But we're expecting a large shipment this weekend. By Monday, we'll have over 100 workers available for placement." As they continued the tour, Marcus memorized every detail of the warehouse layout, the number of guards, and the security measures in place. He noted the locations of exits, the positions of cameras, and the general condition of the captives. "I'm interested in purchasing a dozen workers," Marcus said when they returned to Victor's makeshift office. "Mixed group, some for domestic work, some for ranch operations." Victor's eyes lit up at the prospect of a large sale. "Excellent choice. I can offer you a package deal that will save you money and ensure you get the highest quality workers." As they negotiated terms, Marcus felt sick to his stomach. He was discussing the purchase of human beings as if they were cattle, and every word felt like a betrayal of his own values. But he reminded himself that this was all part of the plan to rescue these people and shut down Victor's operation. "There's just one more thing," Victor said as they concluded their business. "Security is very important in this line of work. I hope you understand that discretion is not just preferred, it's essential." The threat was clear, and Marcus nodded his understanding. Victor was warning him that talking to the authorities would have serious consequences. It was a reminder of just how dangerous the situation had become. As Marcus left the warehouse, he felt the weight of what he'd witnessed. 60 people were being held captive in those buildings, and more were arriving soon. The federal agents would need to act quickly to prevent Victor from moving his operation or harming the victims. When he met with Agent Martinez later that evening, Marcus provided a detailed report of everything he'd seen. The agent's face grew more grim with each detail. "We need to move fast," she said. "If Victor suspects anything, he'll disappear and take his victims with him. We can't let that happen." "When do we rescue them?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow night," Martinez replied, "before that new shipment arrives." As Marcus returned to his ranch, he found Maria waiting for him in the kitchen, her face anxious with worry. Did you find them? She asked quietly. We found them, Marcus confirmed. And tomorrow night we're going to bring them home. For the first time since he'd found her chained to that tree, Maria smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, but it was real. And it reminded Marcus why he'd chosen to put himself in danger for people he'd never met. The rescue operation was scheduled for 2 in the morning, when Victor's guards would be at their most vulnerable. Agent Martinez had assembled a team of federal agents, local SWAT officers, and emergency medical personnel to handle the complex logistics of freeing 60 captives and apprehending an unknown number of suspects. Marcus spent the evening at his ranch, trying to appear normal while his mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. He checked on Maria, who was finally beginning to show signs of healing from her ordeal. She'd gained weight, her bruises had faded, and she was starting to trust the people around her. "Are you scared?" she asked him as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Yes," Marcus admitted, "but sometimes being scared means you're doing something important." Maria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Thank you for believing me, for saving me." "You saved yourself," Marcus replied. "I just happened to be riding by at the right time." As midnight approached, Marcus drove to the staging area where the federal agents were making final preparations. Agent Martinez briefed him on his role in the operation. He would accompany the team to help identify the layout of the warehouse and provide assistance with any victims who might be traumatized by the presence of armed officers. "Remember," Martinez warned him, "this isn't a movie. Real operations are messy, unpredictable, and dangerous. Stay close to me, do exactly what I tell you, and be prepared for anything." At 1:30 a.m., the team moved into position around the warehouse complex. Marcus could see the federal agents taking their positions, their movements precise and coordinated. He thought about the 60 people inside those buildings, sleeping fitfully if at all, not knowing that their nightmare was about to end. At exactly 2:00 a.m., Agent Martinez gave the signal and the operation began. The first phase went smoothly. Federal agents cut through the perimeter fence and disabled the security cameras without triggering any alarms. Marcus followed Martinez through the darkness, his heart pounding as they approached the main building. The warehouse was quieter than Marcus had expected, with only 2 guards visible near the main entrance. Both were subdued quickly and efficiently by the federal agents, who used non-lethal methods to avoid alerting anyone inside. As they entered the building, Marcus was struck by how different it looked at night. The overhead lights were off, leaving only a few emergency bulbs to illuminate the cavernous space. The sections where the captives were held were dark and silent, but Marcus could hear the sounds of people stirring as the agents moved through the facility. Federal agents, Martinez called out as they reached the first section. You're safe now. We're here to help you. The response was immediate and heartbreaking. People began crying, calling out in various languages, and reaching through the makeshift barriers that had confined them. Marcus watched as federal agents began cutting through locks and chains, freeing people who had been held captive for weeks or months. Marcus, a voice called out from one of the sections. Marcus, is that you? He turned to see a young man who looked familiar, though Marcus couldn't place him immediately. Then he realized it was the teenager he'd seen during his tour of the warehouse, the one who'd reminded him of Maria. I'm Diego, the young man said in accented English. Maria's brother. She told me about you, about how you saved her. Marcus felt his knees nearly buckle. Maria's brother was here, in this place, and Marcus had been negotiating to purchase him just hours earlier. The reality of what these people had endured hit him with fresh force. We're getting you out of here, Marcus told Diego, gripping his shoulder. Maria is safe, and now you will be too. As the rescue operation continued, Marcus moved through the warehouse with the federal agents, helping to calm frightened victims and identify those who needed immediate medical attention. Many of the captives were in poor physical condition, showing signs of malnutrition, dehydration, and various injuries. But it was the psychological trauma that concerned Marcus most. These people had been treated as property, threatened with violence, and told that their families would be harmed if they tried to escape. The fear in their eyes was heartbreaking, and Marcus knew that healing from this experience would take a long time. We've got a problem, Agent Martinez said, approaching Marcus with a grim expression. Victor isn't here. Neither are several of his key associates. It looks like they cleared out recently. Marcus felt a chill of fear. If Victor had suspected that the operation was compromised, he might have fled to avoid capture. But there was also the possibility that he was planning something more dangerous. Revenge against the people who had interfered with his business. What about the new shipment? Marcus asked. The one that was supposed to arrive this weekend.